Yes, and we want to welcome back brain health coach and consultant Leigh Richardson, and she is the founder of the Brain Performance Center up in the Metroplex. Good morning, Leigh. How are you?
I am great. Thank you both for having me.
You bet, you bet. So there has been a whole lot of discussion lately on psychedelics. I have an article here that says Elon Musk takes ketamine. I'm going to have to ask you what that is. And then it looks like a lot of executives at venture capital firms are taking psychedelics and microdosing. So let's get right down to it. Let's talk about this. What is up?
Well, it's so interesting to me because psychedelics have been studied for a long time, and they've been studied. Johns Hopkins University has studied how that you can use them. And that certainly is a study that's well controlled and done in a controlled manner. And I think that what we're looking for is a different way to change the state of our mind. Medication has been the magic pill. When all the medication came out, we thought it's so wonderful, and it has been, but it doesn't work for everybody, and it has side effects. And I think that we're kind of slowing down and stopping to think about what have we done before, what's worked before.
Well, there have been people that have said that microdosing and doing things like ayahuasca and stuff like that can help folks with addiction problems and maybe PTSD. What are you hearing?
Well, I think that what I'm hearing is that there is not one answer that works for everybody. Everybody's brain responds so differently. You mentioned ketamine, and ketamine is a pretty well-known treatment for depression. And I've worked with some clients that it works very well for, and I've worked with some clients that it hasn't helped at all. And I think that there's four things that puts a brain in a dysregulated state: genetics, physical head trauma, emotional trauma, and stress. And for PTSD, there's a tremendous amount of certainly physical, emotional, and stress. And we can't guess genetics. But, 10 years ago, we weren't talking about this stuff. Wasn't cool at all. And so I think there's been a lot more genetically prone dysregulation. And the more that open we become and the more willing we become to talk about it, the more, quite honestly, it's very rare that when I meet with people that they don't at least check 3 out of the 4 boxes.
That's interesting. And I have heard of people microdosing for afflictions like Parkinson's and such like that. And so it looks like there's a broad spectrum of things that these psychedelics are being used for.
Well, and I know that's why they're being studied at universities, because they do the applicability. Parkinson's, that's a brain disease. A stroke occurs in the brain. MS is a brain disease. So there's so many things that if we can just alter the way the brain, I come at it at the Brain Performance Center from the way the brain's wiring and firing. But, how oxidation occurs in the brain. There's so many different factors. And my take on psychedelics is I do think it has some value, but I think it needs to be administered in a controlled environment. I don't think going off by yourself and buying a bunch of mushrooms, that number one, do you know what you're buying? And administering those without any guidance or any care is the right way to approach it.
Don't you think that'll be, but what will happen is, if it's not already going on, there'll be a market or a black market for all this kind of stuff, and it'll be just another thing people can abuse. And if it's something easy to grow, I don't know if it is or it isn't, but if it's so easy to grow and easy to conceal the growth, it sounds like we're just opening up another door to a whole new set of problems.
Well, I think anytime we look at a new alternative and we think out of the box, we're opening up a can of worms, and we're not sure what's going to crawl out. I agree that I think to some degree it is being done, but I look at that I choose to see, you can see the good or the bad, and I look at that and I see there are so many people that need help, and not everybody has the resources to reach out and try to do it through an insurance-based program. Not everybody has the resources to work with somebody on a cash level. And so I think people have reached a point where they're looking for help. And I would encourage them to whatever you do for your self-care, don't do it alone. Do it with some type of guidance.
Let me ask you this. Is there any indications in your professional opinion that, I've heard that maybe there is a state or two that have decriminalized some psychedelics, but is there any indication that this might be something that could be prescribed in the future?
Well, and thank you. I think you hit the nail on the head. To control it, it's got to be administered in the right way. And, the legalization is fairly new, and I don't think they have enough data to really know how effectively it's working. And when it's legal, how do you track it?
Right.
How do you monitor it? And I think coming at it from putting some structure in the program allows us to do a further evaluation, and I would be all for that.
Well, and I want to go back to ketamine. I just have no idea what that is. I've never heard of it. And this story says Elon Musk takes ketamine. What does that one do to you? Is there another name for it?
There may be. I'm not familiar with it. That's pretty much what it's marketed and sold under, and it's known by, because I've worked with several clients that have done ketamine. And it takes you into an altering mind state. And one of the things that clients have told me is their dreams change. And to me, a dream is your subconscious processing information, letting go of trauma, letting go, reaching down in. And, from a brainwave state, I use gamma. Gamma is a brainwave that takes us to a superconscious state. And ketamine is more of a chemical and it's administered through an IV. It's not something and when it's administered properly, it is very well controlled. You can have someone come to your home and administer it, but they stay there with you, and some people have a very mild reaction. Some people will experience a reaction while it's going on, and that's where you need that guidance, someone to be there. And if it's nothing more than saying, it's okay, everything's okay right now, just relax. Because when we're alone and we're facing things all by ourselves, and that autonomic nervous system, that fight, flight, or freeze, gets kicked out of balance, it puts us on the roller coaster. We ride it. We fight, we flight, we freeze. And that's not going to create peace.
Well, we hear Aaron Rodgers, for example, the football player. He has, he touts the advantages and the wonders of ayahuasca, and that he has shared that experience with some of his fellow athletes, and he says it does wonders. I think that is sort of a drink of some sort. Is that right?
Well, the form I'm most familiar with is a pill, but it does. You can get it in different formats, and I know I listened to his podcast when he talked about it. He did it in a much more. He did not just take take something that most people have access to. Right. He went and he took it in a controlled manner. Mm-hmm. And to listen to his podcast, there's no way that I don't believe that it was very helpful for him. It put him in touch with himself in a different way. And when I look at a guy like that, how many concussions do you think they've had? How much brain injury do you think that brain has endured? And, I got into doing what I do because many years ago, my kid got hit by a car and never lost consciousness, never went to the emergency room, said, hey, everything's going to be fine. And that was second grade. And in fifth grade, he comes to me and he says, Mom, you got to help me. My brain is broke. So I guess I am oversensitive to what physical head trauma can do. And I certainly think any professional athlete has had more than their fair share of physical head trauma. And with that comes emotional trauma. You're not going to be able to play. Is that going to impact my contract? Are they done with me? And then you roll out that stress. And so I think that when you look at the accumulation of that puts that brain in a really altered state.
Well, tell us, how is your son today?
He's fabulous. He is, when he told me his brain was broke, I'd never heard of any of this. I was running a human resource consulting company. And, he says, Mom, you got to help me. Oh, honey, fifth grade is really hard. And he said, you're not listening to me. And I wasn't. And I sat down and I listened to him, and I could tell he figured this out. When I asked him what's wrong, he said, well, I have ADHD. I said, well, I've never heard of that. But I went to the school, and I talked to the school counselor and explained, and the school counselor said, look, your kid doesn't have ADHD. Your kid's never failed anything. Your kid's never been a behavior problem. Your kid's lazy. Put your kid on Ritalin. And I didn't want to do that because medications never really worked for me. You give me an antibiotic, and I'm the one that gets the red rash on her face. So I started looking for what I could do, and I found neurofeedback. And then I did some neurofeedback because at that point I'd been in ICU once, and I lost my sense of smell, and I got it back. And I was like, this is just amazing stuff. And he had neurofeedback was life-changing for him. It put him back on track. It brought his self-confidence back, and it put him back on track. And I've seen that, whether it's ADHD, whether it's depression, anxiety, OCD, autism. I mean, I've seen stroke, Parkinson's, MS. If you get the brain in a regulated state, it works better.
That is so interesting. And so with that, as you went down the trail of learning about your son, you wound up becoming a licensed professional counselor and opening up the Brain Performance Center, right?
I did, and it was a blessing. I ended up doing an internship with the neurologist that he did treatment under and got board certified in 2005. And I worked for that neurologist until 2009, really learning the business. And he was an amazing man. He was a pioneer, Dr. John Walker. And then in 2009, my model, I brought in that counseling. My model shifted to more of a behavioral health. And I went on my way and started the Brain Performance Center. But in some ways, I'm grateful for his experience because it took me down, and I'm grateful for my experience. I've been back in ICU, and the second time I went in ICU, I had finished all that grad school for counseling. All I had to do was pass the national counseling exam. I fell in my bathroom, hit my head, had a brain bleed, went to ICU, came out, couldn't remember a thing.
Oh, no.
And, oh, yeah. And that's when I decided I'm going to learn whole brain training. And that was something that, that was my decision, and I needed to go off on my own and do that. And I did. And so it's amazing to me with the technology these days, the software. I can slice and dice that data in so many different ways that is so much better than just using my personal knowledge and my eyeballs. So it's been a very great transition for me.
Well, we want to thank you. This is we've been speaking this morning to Leigh Richardson, and she is the clinical director and founder of the Brain Performance Center up in Dallas. And Leigh, thank you for talking to us this morning about psychedelics. Where might our listeners find you?
Well, we've got that good old-fashioned website, thebrainperformancecenter.com. We're on YouTube, which a lot of the younger people like, and we're on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn. So we're all over the place. Please check us out, and if you have any questions, give the office a call.
All right. Leigh Richardson, thank you so much for being with us, and have a happy 4th of July holiday.
Thank you for having me.